Okay, two more, and then... Well, welcome everyone. Bienvenuto a Sicily, I was gonna say, but of course not. But we are going to see Sicily. Before we start, I would like to point out some of the Zoom rules. I keep everyone on mute during the presentation, and afterwards we can chat a little more. If you have questions, you can put them in the chat box, and we will attend them at the end of Elaine's presentation. The program is also being recorded, so we can have access, or you can have access to it afterwards. Then, of course, please welcome our speaker of today, our friend Elaine Ruffolo. Elaine is an art historian with deep expertise in the Italian Renaissance, the Rinascimento. She organizes art history programs and travel programs throughout Italy. Elaine also has her own online platform with weekly art history presentations to bring you the arts and culture of Italy year-round. This is the 6th time we welcome our friend Elaine. Welcome back to the Roxbury Library.
Oh, so happy to be here.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for inviting me. It's a real pleasure. I can't believe it's already been 6 years
No,
coming to
neither.
speak to this group, and it's thanks to you, Isabel, that I come. We've been
Thank
great
you.
friends for many, many years in Florence,
Yes,
and now at least we get to spend some time together. And
indeed.
what I'd like to do is talk about the Sicily, the art and architecture from the Greeks to the Romans specifically. So everybody pull up your chairs close to your screens, or if you're looking on a computer or television or even your phones, try to get up close because I've chosen beautiful images with high resolution. So I want to make it feel like we are walking through Sicily together, covering this fascinating period of Sicily art and architecture from the Greeks to the Romans. And here is the island. And just to state the obvious, I have to go pretty fast because I've got a lot of history to cover. But to state the obvious, Sicily is an island off the southern coast of Italy. And it is known for many things: incredible food, Greek architecture, Byzantine mosaics, gorgeous beaches, colorful people, pleasant weather, and I guess ingloriously, the homeland of the mafia. And of course, we all know about that because maybe we've watched the Godfather series one too many times. The capital of Sicily is a town called Palermo, and it's right, the important part in the north west corner of the island of Sicily, and in the very heart of the city lies an astonishing building, which I like to use as a symbol for the entire island. And that is, of course, the cathedral. And here is the Cathedral of Palermo, unique. It is just out, we're looking at it from the outside, and it really is full of surprises everywhere. I mean, first of all, just look at this exterior. If I hadn't told you it was a cathedral, you might have guessed that it was maybe a wall or a mosque or some kind of an Eastern fantasy. But look at the walls, which are crenellated like some North African fortress, with parts of it looking as if it came straight out of, say, Tunisia. The dome and the bell tower um, proclaim it to be, of course, a Catholic church, but the decorated arches with geometric designs and the turquoise and cream colored tiles, along with, of all things, date palms in the courtyard that give it this distinct Eastern flavor. I mean, this amazing building can be considered a kind of agglomeration of different cultures that have left their imprint in the very heart of Sicily for centuries. Look at this detail. Just this detail at the roofline shows us Romanesque kind of bestial figures, even a bat here and an owl and a snail, and then these wonderful arabesques, a figure looking Romanesque, opening up a book with what looks to me like Hebrew inscription, the Annunciation with this wonderful image of Gabriel on the left-hand side and Mary receiving her news on the right-hand side, or even this detail, which is just below in one of the tympanums, showing us the zigzag motif, which again looks more Arabic than it does Italian or even Christian. So the cathedral was finished in 1185, but it was built on the site of a pre-existing mosque, which explains some of the architecture. In fact, if you just step inside for a moment, you'll see that things change significantly, and you're greeted with a much newer neoclassical architecture than more antique sculptures, and of course, the great Baroque statue of Santa Rosalia, who is the patron saint of Palermo. It is the beating heart of the city, and it is an amazing building that begins on the site of a pre-existing mosque in 1185, which explains some of the architecture. Oh, in fact, if you take a look at the exterior, here's the porch to go into Palermo Cathedral. And if you look at the column on the left-hand side, you'll see an inscription from a passage of the Quran engraved into the columns of the entrance of the church. I mean, that's amazing. That mosque was built on a much older Orthodox Greek church, and underneath the entire structure is a Roman road. So you see, I wanted to start with this because it really represents Sicily in these layers of history and culture that are expressed in this example of architecture. And it really speaks volumes to the people that shape not only this particular building, but the entire history of Sicily. So wanted to start with that as our anecdote for Sicily. But let's go to a broader base. Here's our island once again. And Giuseppe Lampedusa, who wrote in 1856, he wrote something called Il Gatto Pardo, or the leopard. He wrote, "For over 25 centuries, we've been bearing the weight of superb civilizations, all from the outside, none made by ourselves, none that we could call our own." And again, that's a specific line from Il Gatto Pardo. And Lampedusa was lamenting Sicily, the history of conquest and the settlements by different peoples, beginning with the Phoenicians, the Greeks, the Romans, the Byzantines. Have a look. Here we are. The Phoenicians, the Greeks, the Romans, the Byzantines, the Arabs, Normans, Habsburgs. I mean, my goodness, what civilization did not march through Sicily and leave their mark? But each of these civilizations brought to Sicily its own cultural and artistic tradition. And I know that Lampedusa saw this as a burden, but actually I think it was much more of a blessing for the island. It is really the mixing of these cultures, as we saw with the Cathedral of Palermo, that makes Sicily unique. And it's not a simple story of conquest, but it's also a story of assimilation and, I think, creative transformation. So these are the different civilizations, and we will work from basically the Phoenicians to the Normans. But first, I want to consider a couple of things before we dive down into the individual periods. That is, we got to talk about geography. Location, 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 as they say. And Sicily today is, well, of course, considered on the periphery of great urban centers of Europe. I mean, it's not Milan, it's not Paris, it's not London. But when you look at where it is right in the very middle of the Mediterranean. What does Mediterranean mean? It means meda terra, the middle of the earth. Therefore, friends, it was the staging post between East and West, between Greece and the Iberian Peninsula. That is where Portugal and Spain is, of course. It is a place that you almost by necessity had to pass through. It is separated. Here's another view. Yeah, these are the Straits of Messina, and it's separated by the Straits of Messina by really only 150 kilometers. That means it's closer to Tunisia or North Africa than it is to, say, Rome or Milan. And migrants from as far back as 700 BC were trying to reach Sicily, coming from either the north or trying to get to the north or to the west. Now, for the Phoenicians, who were a race of maritime traders from specifically Lebanon, this island was ideal because they could set up their trading posts and extend their commercial networks. For military and naval power, Sicily was strategically important because it was the foothold to gain control into the Mediterranean. And the Romans used it as a naval base for the Punic Wars. So lots of things by just looking at the location right in the center of the Mediterranean Sea. I mean, once you just lean back and think about that, you really understand why it was such a major player for so many centuries of civilization. Now, of course, the Muslim took it over when they were extending their empire, even the Habsburgs in Spain, all those things, all about geographical location. But next, consider Sicily's resources, both natural resources and, man-made. So Sicily's wealth and natural resources are important factors that attract incomers into the island. Today, Sicily is, of course, considered a very poor country or poor region of Italy, and that's because of mismanagement and abuse thanks to the mafia. But in antiquity, its natural harbors, which you can see over here on the right-hand side, my slide, along the Ionian Sea, helped it out, of course. Then they had rich, fertile terrain and made it a desirable place to settle. And during the period of the Romans, Sicily was the breadbasket of the Republic and later on of the Empire. And of course, don't forget about tuna fish, one of the great commodities or resources of the island. In the Middle Ages, it was an agricultural center. Why? Thanks to the improvements done by the Muslims and the Normans. And then finally, to consider as kind of a broad brush I'm painting here before I get into specifics, is that Sicily has, unfortunately, natural and man-made disasters. We got to consider the frequency of natural disasters on the island because it's seismic and it has suffered from earthquakes and volcanic eruptions for centuries, and of course, violent wars. What you're looking at here is a wonderful image of Mount Etna, one of the two major volcanoes in Italy. And it blows and is destructive. Ancient Catania was destroyed by an eruption of Etna in 122 BC and then utterly destroyed in 1693. Greek temples could be knocked over. The city of Messina was destroyed by an earthquake in 1783, 1894, and 1908. And then man-made disasters, World War II. 1944, Sicily was really the battleground for the Allies against the Nazis. These disasters are devastating, but when you think about it for a moment, they also could lead to reconstruction because you've got to pick up and rebuild. And that, of course, stimulated creativity. And finally, something to consider, a very sad story, is the destruction of Sicily by the hands of corruption, called the Casa Nostra. That needs to be considered. the ugly new developments that you can see here in Palermo are a reflection of neglect, the paving over of historic buildings and gardens, thanks to speculation, thanks to the mafia. And there's a term for this, especially in Palermo, called the sack of Palermo. And the sacking it, meaning completely taking advantage of the situation and building up what in parts of Palermo are horrific looking urban sprawl. And think about theft, the sacking of art, the theft of Caravaggio's altarpiece from San Lorenzo in Palermo, the smuggling of excavated antiquities is still a program today. But again, I leave this topic to the social historians of modern day Italy and the mafia, because I'm going to concern myself with antiquity to the 12th century. So now let's turn to the major periods once again. Prehistoric Phoenician, Greeks, Romans, Byzantines, Arabs, and the fascinating Normans. These are the major periods of Sicilian history. And those of you, or maybe even those of you who don't have Sicilian blood, this is a good image to take a quick picture of so you can remember the periods that I'm going to be talking of. This is our timeline. And we begin with this prehistoric era, Sicani and Sicily. Here's an image. So here's ancient Sicily. And the indigenous people of Sicily were three, starting with the Sicels on the far right-hand side towards the east, and that's where we get our name Sicily, in eastern Sicily, the Sicans in the center, and the Elemonians in the west. Think of them like the different tribes that we have in the United States. They were like the Native American tribes, for example. These peoples are Bronze Age dwellers that may have originally come from the Iberian Peninsula in Spain. I mean, we're talking, everybody, 1,400 BC. So a period of time that's way beyond the interest in art and architecture. Although I have to say, there's not much from this period, but I do like these images, which are cave paintings and stele. Stele is the image that you see over on the left-hand side, which would have marked a gravestone. Very simple images, low relief on high, very durable stone, or the one in the middle, which looks to me like they're jumping and dancing, or even the figures on the right-hand side who are clearly male figures, a little bit reminding us of those early Greeks, the Minoans. But this is the kind of thing that we found in Sicily during the prehistoric period. But really for us, our period, the beginnings of civilization, higher civilization as we think of it, begins with the Greeks in about the 8th century, so around 700 BC, when Sicily was transformed by a greater civilization, the dominant civilization of the time, the Greeks. So the Greeks had already begun to settle in Asia Minor, in Libya, and southern Italy and Sicily. And it's not a surprise that the very earliest cities in Sicily were founded on the East Coast, which of course is the natural stopping off point on the sea route from Greece to Western Europe. And here they are, major cities. And you can kind of make out the names if you know something about the modern cities today. Messana is Messina. Naxos is exactly next to a place called Taormina. Siracosa is Syracuse, Siracusa in Italian, and Gela still has the same name. So Naxos was formed in 734 BC, Siracusa in 733. And we know that they were founded by the Greeks who were escaping Corinth, leaving Corinth. Messina, Catania, Gela in about 688. And they came from the Peloponnesian Peninsula. And basically, they're migrants, so we're leaving behind their homes. The leaders of these expeditions were mainly aristocrats. Maybe they were feeling challenged by the city-states and democracy, which had become all the rage in Greece. That means that the original founders of the Greek towns in Sicily probably came over because of political reasons. And this is all going on in 700, 600 BC. Each city was independent, they had their own type of government, and slowly, these settlers started to move westward, staying on the coast because in the end, the Greeks are sailors. Selinunte, Agrigento, Segesta. And this was the age of the so-called tyrants. Not all tyrants were cruel, but they were legendary in Italy in Sicily for being cruel, especially Phelus of Agrigento, who was famous for roasting his enemies in a bronze bull designed so that their victims' screams were transformed into the gentle lowing of a bull. Wow, that is graphic. So not surprisingly, this whole period, there were some fighting within the Greeks and destruction between the Sicilian city-states. What happened to the original population? They retreated into the center of Sicily. They probably married and were assimilated into the Greeks, and pretty soon the Greeks became the Sicilians. And it was a very good time for them, especially in a place called Syracuse. Syracuse. I used to teach for Syracuse. Isabella's son went to Syracuse, so it's near and dear to our hearts. In the 5th century BC, was the largest Greek city outside of Greece, second only to Athens, for goodness sakes. And in fact, the best preserved Greek temples and objects are found in ancient Syracuse and along the coast of Sicily. Why is that? Because Sicily didn't undergo the Ottoman Turks in the way that Greece had, and because those cities became remote, people left it alone. And that's why we have these fabulous temples along in Greece. This is at Selinunte. This Temple E dating from 460 BC. Look at the condition, absolutely wonderful. Or here, this is in Agrigento, at the very beginning of the Temple of the Valley of Temples, in excellent condition because it was forgotten about. Still standing there, it's called a Doric order temple. Or Segesta, one of my favorite places in the world, probably where we get our word suggestive because of the situation of this lovely, unfinished temple in this valley, which is actually quite high. It's a valley up in the mountains. It's 304 meters above sea level. Right behind it is a deep ravine that's formed by a lovely torrent. And it was the prominent temple for that enigmatic civilization called the Elamians, kind of shrouded in obscurity. And you still feel that when you come up into Segesta. Here's another view. Look at this powerful image, unfinished, never completed, but standing there in a field of, look at that, wildflowers. It must be one of the most beautiful spots really in the world, friends. Here's another beautiful view. Triglyphs and metapedes, Doric order, triangular capital, beautiful row of columns. And behind you, you can see the rock formations and how the Greeks loved to situate their temples overlooking the sea, so you could see it high off into the distance. And this is, of course, the religious center of town for the other kind of building that the Greeks loved at the time, besides religious buildings, were theaters. which really reflected its civic pride. They were usually sited right near the agora. It wasn't just a place for the elites, but instead a natural gathering place for the Greeks to come together, plays that would deal with universal themes, theater, political assemblies. They're always laid out in this semicircular plan carved out of the natural slope in the hillside, which is easy because Sicily is so mountainous. Here's the famous theater at Taormina. They loved comic performances and acrobats and jugglers. But of course, we know soon the Romans are going to come on the scene. They'll transform these theaters into amphitheaters for gladiatorial games. But these are the Greeks, and this is a wonderful time, of course, in history of the island. But eventually, Sicily is going to get caught up in the Punic Wars, which pitted Rome against Carthage. Punic is the Greek word for Carthage. And it got caught up. Why? Location. Between Italy and North Africa. Carthage had outposts throughout Sicily, had made enemies and alliances with the different city-states of Sicily. 3 Punic Wars later. Remember, Punic is the Greek word for Carthage. The Romans defeated the Phoenicians, and Sicily became a Roman province. Here she is. Yeah. First under the Roman Republic, which made it the very first province during the Roman Republic, and then, of course, under the Empire. And for 7 centuries, Sicily was under control of the Romans. Now, for the Romans, Sicily had 2 major functions. One, it was a place for otium, that is, leisure and relaxation. We know that the Emperor Hadrian climbed up to Mount Etna. Ovid admired the volcano's eruptions lighting up the sky. And wealthy Romans, first under the Republic and then under the Empire, they built holiday homes along the coast. Think of it as kind of a white lotus of classical Rome. I'm showing you the Villa Romana del Casale, known as Piazza Armerina today, which is right more or less in the center of Sicily, which is delightful. You can see this lively section built in the early 4th century, erotic-themed mosaics, very playful. Look at the couple on the lower left-hand side in an amorous embrace. And the ladies, this is from the 4th century, wearing bikinis and playing volleyball. I mean, this is just something that we all have to see during our lifetime. Then, of course, the other major role was its natural resources, tuna fish, animals, and grain. Much of the animals that were imported to Rome to go into the Colosseum were taken from Sicily. And the grain, of course, was able to feed the Roman Empire. Here's a mosaic of one of the floors at the Villa Casale showing the grain. And it basically became, the breadbasket of the rest of the Roman Empire. So that's what's going on during this period. But of course, Christianity, now moving forward, is going to arrive at the island in about 230 AD. The earliest Christian martyrs, meaning they were killed for their belief because it was illegal to be a Christian, were on the scene just around the 3rd century, before Christianity was legalized. Who were they? You have Marcellus, who was the bishop, eventually the bishop of Sicily. Then we can see, Saint Agatha, who's on your right-hand side. She unfortunately dies by having her breast cut off, of all terrible things. And she today is still the patron saint of Catania. Even today, they have special sweets which look like the breasts of a woman with cherries where the nipple should be. They're delicious, by the way. And they go all the way back to the very beginnings of Christianity in Sicily. So really what we're seeing with this slide I put together is that Sicily is quite a mixed bag. We got the Greeks and the Romans, the Carthaginians, all of them left their practices, their religious practices. Oh, and let's not forget Judaism was practiced in Roman Sicily, and the presence of Jews is documented to the late 4th century, or maybe even earlier than that. Now, what happens? Of course, the Roman Empire is going to overextend its borders, as you can see. What's always in the middle of the Roman Empire? Sicily. And pretty soon it can't control its borders. Look, it goes from Britain to Egypt, Armenia to Mauritania, Lusitania, today Portugal, to the far-flung region of Judea or Jerusalem today. And they can't control the borders. What else happens? The army starts to pay allegiance to its generals rather than to its emperors. Christianity is legalized in the year 313 under the Edict of Milan, and Constantine the Great moves the capital to Constantinople. So all of these major events that are going on in the 4th century have a direct impact on the Roman Empire because we start to see the beginnings of barbarian invasions, starting with the Angles, Saxons, Franks, Goths, Visigoths, Ostrogoths, Huns, and a terrible group called the Vandals. Look at the Vandals. They're down there at the bottom in blue, and they will directly affect Sicily. Rome is sacked in 410, and the Vandals and later the Ostrogoths will take over Sicily, and this is the period of barbarian invasions. Barbarian comes from the word babblers. So it is not too much is left from that period of time. This is also the period of invasions from Byzantium. The Roman Empire in the east will continue on under a man named Justinian and his great general Belisarius. They will actually go and take Sicily away from the barbarians. There's a little known fact that actually Syracusa, was the capital of the Byzantine Empire from 663 to 668, which is remarkable. And this is little interesting fact. The period of time that it was legal to take pre-existing antique temples and turn them into churches. And that's what you see here in Syracuse. The Temple of Athena is incorporated into a structure that became the cathedral of Syracuse. So interesting time. Here's Justinian coming on the scene. You can see that in green, Sicily was part of the Vandal Empire, where we get our word vandalism. Enter in Justinian. He takes most of it back, and things are stable once again. But there's a new force on the horizon, a new force coming from the east, and that will be the Arabs. And during the 7th century, here they come. They're going to manage to take over control of most of North Africa. And by 700, they had control over Tunis, Carthage, and they were on their way to, of course, conquer Spain. The Arabs had moved across Sicily in a kind of destructive journey of slaughter and pillage. They ended up taking the city of Palermo in the year 831. Now, initially, it was an upheaval and it was a violent conquest. But Sicily, after that point, enjoyed a relative period of prosperity under the Arabs. Arab rulers were tolerant of Christians and Jews. I mean, Christians and Jews, they were allowed to worship. They were highly regulated. They had to pay a higher tax. They had to also wear distinguishing marks on their houses and clothing. but they did enjoy a period of relative tolerance. So the Arabs were good for Italy. Look at the word for Palermo. It comes from the Muslim word Balarm, and you can see how it changes or morphs into Palermo. The Arabs were good for Sicily's infrastructure. The Arab elites developed agriculture. They promoted trade. They installed irrigation systems, including the water wheel, an underground water tunnel, some of which still survive. And they next introduced the cultivation of oranges, lemons, watermelons, rice, cotton, mulberries, and silkworms. They intensified the crops such as almonds, pistachios, and dates. All of this we think of as Arab, but you'll find this distinctly interwoven into the cuisine of Sicily today. They also taught the locals how to mine iron and silver, lead. They extracted sea salt. Look, the salt mines outside of Trapani were all really founded by the Arabs, as well as the fishing industry. So many things that we associate with Sicily can be traced back to the Arabs. So yeah, the Arabs occupied Sicily for over 2 centuries, yet surprisingly, there's very, very little left of that period. All we know is maybe some traditions. We know from letters and descriptions of Palermo that there were over 300 mosques, the Sultan's palace. Yet the time period has left us little, but you can still see, for example, in those 3 domes at the top, an Arab connection, the famous heads of the Moors on the lower right-hand side, and a beautiful kind of ceiling decoration called muqannas. Just fragments here and there of the Arabs, but really fascinating to see. Now let's turn to the next chapter. Oh, I love this image. I wanted to show this to you because what you're seeing here is a tombstone with 4 different inscriptions: Latin, Greek, Arabic, and Judeo-Arabic. I mean, it just represents Palermo perfectly. This comes from 1149 in Palermo. And even here and there in Palermo today, you can see an inscription in Kufic, which is the oldest calligraphy of Arabic scripts. I mean, fascinating. All right, now let's turn to the next important chapter and the final one for our investigation here into Sicily and its different peoples. And that's how we get to, here's Palermo again, Sicily, and here's our capital, Palermo. And who are the next great peoples to come and dominate Sicily? The Normans. Historian John Jules Norwich described the history of the Normans in Sicily as one of the most extraordinary and fascinating epochs of European history, and he labeled that between the ages of Julius Caesar and Napoleon. I mean, wow, says a lot. It is a tale, of course, of swashbuckling adventure, a tale of ambition, of astonishing twists of fate, and incredible cultural achievements. I mean, this is all taking place, friends, during the peak of the Middle Ages. I mean, the age of crusaders, kings, vagabonds, and adventurers, but of all things, pirates, bunch of pirates. We think of Vikings, here they are, as pirates who are terrorizing monks in their monasteries, pillaging, carrying off gold and silver, kind of Game of Thrones thing. And you've probably heard of the Vikings who were raiding the city of Paris or conquering England during the Battle of Hastings in 1066. We all know that. But you probably never paired Vikings and Sicilians, yet we should. The guys that we call Normans are actually Vikings. Have a look. The word Norman comes from the word Norsemen, which means men of the north. And these are the guys where my circle is, who come from Scandinavia, Denmark, Iceland, and initially they're called Vikings, and then they're called Norsemen, and then Normans. They were such a problem in Europe that eventually the French king bought them off and gave them a place to settle in France called Normandy, the same Normandy as D-Day. Their king was Rollo. He was the head. He carved up the ports of France and England, and they called themselves dukes and counts. But everybody, they were a bunch of pirates. The Normans were known for being tall and pale skin with light eyes, blonde or red hair. They were strong. They were very good fighters. They were good on horses, and they were innovative. They're the ones who developed siege towers. I mean, we're talking 900s, 1000s, the middle part of the Middle Ages. And they were adaptable. They changed their gear consistently. The details I'm showing you on these slides come from the Bayeux tapestry, which is coming on display in London very, very soon. They haven't announced when, but it's coming under restoration. It's coming out for display while the museum in Normandy is under restoration. Anyway, they wore light chainmail, almond-shaped shields, and they had a knack for quickly developing the skills they needed to survive. These Normans, who were initially pagan, converted to Christianity. And something you need to realize that in France, Normandy, the first son inherits everything, while the second, third, fourth son gets nothing. They got to figure it out themselves. So if you're a young, virile Christian Norman, what would you do with yourself? Well, you might take off and go to a crusade or maybe a pilgrimage. These were young men seeking adventure. So there was one particular group of Normans looking for adventure and opportunity. And they had gone off to the Holy Land, and they stopped on the way back in southern Italy and Sicily at the invitation of the locals to help stop Arab pirates from raiding them, because the Arabs were Muslim, the Normans were pirates as well, but they were Christian. They ended up doing such a great job getting rid of those Arabs that they got hired to be great fighters by many different rulers to go ahead and fight for them. Everybody wanted Norman muscle. The Normans operated like an organized crime unit, thugs for hire, fighters for pay. And they managed to unify southern Italy and Sicily, and that became the kingdom of the Normans in Sicily. And I always think this is so interesting. John Jules Norwich said, for the first and indeed the very last time in European history, three great civilizations in the Mediterranean were united: Latin, Greek, and Arabic. They all came together in harmony and concord. And I would add to that actually the Jews as well. And this is going on in the very center of the Second and Third Crusade, when just a few hundred miles away, the Christians and the Muslims were bashing each other's brains out. But here on one island in the middle of the Mediterranean, Sicily, the dead center of the Mediterranean, it was a place of peace and understanding and mutual respect. And this is all going on under the Norman kings. Here's a nice graphic. Italy in 1000 with the Emirate of Sicily and the Kingdom of Italy by the time the Normans have taken over. Here are the Norman kings. Robert Guiscard, which means Robert the Wise, Robert II, Roger II, and William II. All of these. And it was under these Norman kings that you have a wonderful period of peace, tranquility, building royal dwellings, not just ecclesiastical architecture, which I'm going to get to, but beautiful suburban royal dwellings. The architecture drew heavily upon the tradition of Islamic architecture. Even the coinage will reveal their duality with Arabic on the right and Greek on the left, or the tabula rogeriana, it's called, was drawn by a man named Al-Idrisi in 1154, who stayed at Roger's court for 18 years and worked on commentaries and illustrations. I mean, thanks to these Islamic merchants and explorers, information was brought to the Normans, and it was the most accurate map of the world in pre-modern times. Or this beautiful mantle of Roger, the Norseman, which is a symbol of cultural fusion, reflecting Roger's rulership absolutely perfectly. So really a period of remarkable tolerance with Roger II of Sicily, here ruling Palermo. So in these last 8 minutes, what I want to do is show you the crowning achievement of the Normans, and that is Monreale, the Cathedral of Monreale. It was built under William II, Roger's grandson, and it's a large complex that includes a church and a cloister, and the date of this is 1174. And we're looking at the main entrance, which is the narthex and 2 towers. The one on the left is unfinished. Here are the main doors, which were made in Pisa. They were made in Pisa and mailed to Palermo at the bequest of the king. Here's that zigzag motif, and they're the first bronze doors since classical antiquity, done by a sculptor named Bonanno Bonanis of Pisa. Beautiful. Walk around with me. This is the exterior. And you can see that it's a wild combination of magnificently carved arches with colored inlay, with a kind of curious combination of Norman, French, and Byzantine and Arabic, all mixed up in one. But it gets better. Step inside. The cathedral is almost entirely covered in golden and colorful mosaics. The effect is to make you feel as if you've entered into a place that's not really of this world, and we're struck by the immense scale of the building. It covers 6,400 square meters of mosaics. I mean, amazing. There are 2,200 kilos of gold. That's 5,000 pounds of gold up on the walls. Look at the nave and the side aisles divided by columns of various colors. They are spectacular. Here's the view looking down towards the apse to a Christ figure. Here's the roof done in carved wood, olive wood, and mahogany. Here is the pantocrator figure of Christ. Comes from the Greek word pan, which means all, and krater, which means power. And he's holding a book that says, I am the light of the world, with the symbol of Jesus Christ, Savior, written in an anagram in Greek on the top. And then beneath him, you can see the Virgin Mary seated, surrounded by the angels and Peter and Paul. Here she is. Always a mixing up of Greek and Arabic style, I should say, and Latin. Now here is the one side of the nave, which is again is completely encrusted in these beautiful, beautiful mosaics, showing us stories of the Old Testament, creation of the world, creation of the firmament. You can see the sun and the moon on the left-hand side, the fishes and fowl, and the creation of Adam. It could be considered the poor man's Bible, making you understand what happens during this period. Oh, here's the of course, the temptation. We're just taking a moment and looking at how carefully these mosaics. So we're not sure who they were, but they're definitely coming from um, probably Byzantium, and how they've taken this great care of laying out the mosaics carefully to give you a sense of three-dimensionality. Look at how Eve's tummy is a little bit puffier than Adam's. He looks more muscular. He's darker colored. She's more elegant. And that's all told through mosaic, or the building of the ark, with the animals going in two by two. And there is Noah's family peeking out underneath the ark. And this, I love this detail. There's Noah sending out a dove, but underneath you can still see the flood where the figures are just peeking out underneath the water of the flood. I mean, the naturalism there done in mosaic is frankly amazing. And Tower of Babel. This is a wonderful example of what the Normans were doing at this time in the interior. Now I'm going to finish this with a very quick look at the cloister next door. Just when you think it can't get any better, walk into the cloister, which dates exactly the same time as the building itself. And we're in a cloister that is divided up into four sections, four quadrants, like the four seasons, with four different trees: a fig tree, a pomegranate, an olive tree, and a palm tree. Fig for the fruit of the Bible, olive for the tree of Noah, the palm for the palm of martyrdom, and a pomegranate for the idea of rebirth. And all around, you can see a series of arches with columns that have been sculpted and inlaid in beautiful mosaic. There are 228 columns, and at the top of the columns, you see these lovely, lovely capitals, which each have a different subject depicted in the capital, ranging from everything from the Old Testament to kind of a whimsical, profane subject matter. And Annunciation, Massacre of the Innocents, Expulsion of Adam and Eve, and this wonderful figure, unidentified, but frowning and scowling down at the observer, scowling at us from the 12th century right to today. And this is the crowning achievement of the Normans in Sicily. Now I'm going to stop here. We've reached 55 minutes, and I'll be very, very happy to take some questions.
Thank you, Elaine. You really took us away to the old world.
I hope so.
Yeah, everyone, if you